I'd like to invite up Kyle. Kyle, would you mind coming up and sharing a few thoughts and a few words with us, please?
Hi. Oh, sorry. I thought it was a quiet mic. What a great story from that young woman, a success story. Most of you would know me as that fat loudmouth from the radio or from the television. But man, it was a long journey to get here. Back in the 80s, wow, that's a fair while ago. Sorry for you young ones tuning out. You're like, yeah, he's that old. I was from a broken home, but grew up in the 70s. There was domestic violence and alcohol in my young childhood. One day my mum got the courage to run off with myself and my younger brother and leave that horrible life behind. And then the next year I went from, I think I'd changed primary schools maybe 10 times in a year. I was always the new kid at the school, but then we'd have to leave because my dad would find us, and my mum lived in terror. Eventually, she married a man who was about 20 years older, and he was very kind to her, which I loved, but he was also very strict, so the violence turned onto me and my younger brother. We were a little bit, we were little shits, but man, we got flogged, and I mean flogged back in the day. It was pretty bad when I think of it now, but I still didn't care because my mum wasn't being attacked, so I felt good. But I was a good kid, well behaved because of the strict upbringing that I was in. And then one day my mother and stepfather went away on a weekend trip, and all my friends were like, parties at your house. And I was like, wow, that peer group pressure for the first time. And I was like, no, I don't take people to my house. And anyway, they were like, yep, parties at your house. So eventually the party was at our house. I was there, my parents were away. But due to a flood in New South Wales somewhere, their bus trip got turned back and they arrived home in the middle of the party. So it was a typical teenage party, drinking, carrying on, smoking. I think I'd been convinced to take my mum's little Mazda Rotary, put 15 friends in it and drive around the streets. So when I pulled back in the driveway, there was my mum, my stepfather, kids running everywhere. Mum was screaming, and I thought, oh my God, I'm finished, I'm dead. There's no escaping this. So I was thrown out that night, and because they were so strict, I thought, well, that's it, I'm on my own now. So I went to every family member's house and was turned away at the door. No, your mum's rung us, you're not welcome here, you're a bad boy. So for the next 6 or 7 weeks, I bounced around to different friends' houses, living on the couch until their parents would say, Kyle's been here like 4 or 5 days, what's going on? And then I'd hightail it to another friend's. Eventually they ran out. And I remember the first night I slept on the street, and I was only homeless for a year in Brisbane in the 80s. There was not a lot of help. I couldn't get living out of home allowance because back then I needed a letter from my parents, which was impossible. And about a month later, I think I had a push bike for the first month, and I'd ride back to the house late at night, and I'd sit up the street until the lights got turned out, and then I'd ride around until I found somewhere safe, behind a shopping centre, in a drain, wherever I felt safe. I was terrified. I was like a mousy little kid. I certainly wasn't rough and tough, so was quite scared a lot. And then one day I saw a for sale sign at the front of my parents' house one night when I was there watching the lights go out. And then 2 weeks later the house was sold and they'd moved away. So I was like, wow, I've just turned 16, I haven't finished year 10, my parents have moved away, I don't know where they are, I'm on my own. And I was by myself for months, and then eventually ran into some other kids that were in similar situations. One kid was gay and his father didn't like it, so he was turfed out. Some other girl had been sexually abused by someone in her family, and there was a couple of other kids that were just, naughty kids that had been thrown out as well. So we all had different circumstances which led us to being homeless and hungry. They were robbing people back then, older people at ATMs to try and get money, and that was not in my nature. So I showed them how I'd been eating just by stealing milk and bread behind convenience stores. So for a year I would eat a loaf of bread every day and a litre of milk, which is why I have such a beautiful athletic physique today. So still to this day, if I feel a bit stressed And I didn't realise it till I was told by a friend that I will grab 4 or 5 bits of white bread out of the bread packet and just start eating it. And I think that's obviously some sort of weirdo vibe that I've got left over from those days. But it makes me feel it's a comfort food for me. And one day I ran into my auntie, who happened to be, she was living in Townsville, but I was in Brisbane. She was a nurse. She just ran into me by coincidence in the city in Brisbane. Started crying, said, "We've all been looking for you. Like, where have you been?" I was filthy. I was like a real street rat. Hadn't bathed, same clothes for a year. So you can imagine how nice that would be, especially the mums out here that do a lot of washing, really bad. And she convinced me to move to her place in Townsville. She had 3 boys about my age, so off I went to Townsville. But I was angry and I was a smart ass, but I wanted that help. So it was a miracle that she and I ran into each other that day. So I went to live with my auntie in Townsville. She's a nurse, so she's tough but fair. And her boys were academically brilliant. One was like a bit older than me. He started work at the National Bank. The middle boy was a football star and the young one was into trains. And these kids were so nice and polite and well-mannered, and I was like the complete opposite. But I used humour to get through it. So eventually broke them all down. I'd get in trouble quite a lot. And she realised that I liked radio, because when I was in Townsville, there was only one little radio station, and it was a dinky, country, horrible little radio station. But when I was in Brisbane, living with the other kids that I'd met on the street, we lived in a horse float behind a service station, and at night time I'd hear the radios on above the petrol houses, and that was my only form of entertainment. So I fell in love with radio there, but didn't realise I could ever work in radio. That was a pipe dream to me. I was like, wow, like they have so much fun, that sounds so great. And my auntie found a job in the newspaper in Townsville. It was for 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. So not really, not the greatest job, but it was something. So I went in and applied for that job, and the woman didn't like me, I could tell. I was young, I was only 16. The job required to have a driver's license to drive this radio station car around and give away presents. So I thought, I'm not going to get this job. So I started lying. Yep, I've got a license, total lie. Yes, I've worked at radio stations before, total lie. And then I got the job. I drove that car home to my auntie's place, a 16-year-old homeless, runaway, smart-ass kid. She nearly died. "You've got no license. I can't believe it." And I said, "This is my only chance. I'll get my license in 3 months." She turned a blind eye. Naughty auntie. But thank God she did, because if she'd have been tough and said, "No, you can't do that," I probably would have run off again. And I fell in love with a job that I was fascinated with, and I was getting paid, I think, $11 an hour, 1 hour a day. So I wasn't buying anything, wasn't making any plans. But somehow, 10 years later, I'd worked at about 7 stations, and I was always told by the management, "You'll never be good enough to speak on the radio. You've got a squeaky voice." And back then everyone was like, "Okay, this is how radio announcers sound." They were all the big old school announcers. So for 10 years I worked in all these little bush radio stations and learned every job in the radio station. One day I was in Perth and someone was sick or on holidays, and they said, "Oh, we need someone to fill in." So I went to fill in. And someone heard me somewhere and was like, "Oh, this guy's got a bit of spirit. He's got a cheeky sense of humour." And they gave me an opportunity to do that job, but for free, talking on the radio. I still had to do my other job, which was making up promotions and competitions. And then years and years and years went by, and I thought, I was working 20-hour days, really. I was first there, last out, but I loved it because I found something that I loved. And a lot of kids, they need to find something they loved or they're talented at, because I truly believe if you can get a job doing something you love, it doesn't even feel like work. And not a lot of us can do that. We haven't got that luck. But I was lucky, and eventually made my way to Sydney. And I thought I'd never be good enough I thought maybe one day I'll be good enough to work on the Gold Coast. That was my dream. The job came up at the Gold Coast and I was told, "Sorry, you can't have that job." 2 years later, I was brought to Sydney and given a great opportunity to host a national show. But man, I should have got fired 1,000 times. Like, I was still a cheeky, smart aleck, but that was just me. But I knew the laws and I knew the rules and I knew how I knew how to read people, and I would vibe off different people with different energies. That's just a survival instinct that I learned when I was 16, how to get through life. So I used that all through work, and somehow there was enough people that liked whatever I did for me to be here 18 years later, still in the same city, doing well, still working with the same girl. But I thank God every day, because if I didn't find that job or if I didn't have that opportunity from my auntie, I have no idea where I would be. So when Stepping Stone House came along and said, hey, we heard your story, we'd like you to come and talk to some of our kids, because sometimes you just need to know there's a light at the end of a tunnel, that there is a way out. There is a way to achieve, but it's not hard. I mean, it's not easy. It's hard work. It's hard work. And I've met a couple of the guys and girls here today, and to see their smiling faces and to see that they're excited about life is wonderful. But we've got to remember, this city is full of people that are still homeless, that are still hiding, that are still worried, that don't even realise there's somewhere where people care and where people want to help them. So that's why I thought this is the charity for me. This is something that I've been through. And if you listen to my radio show, you've heard me tell this story a million times. I'm glad Jackie O's not here, because she'd be rolling her eyes. Here we go with the homeless story again. But I think it's important for people to know that there's a lot more out there than you would expect. And sometimes just lending a helping hand is all some of these people need, just a glimmer of hope to know that someone cares. And Stepping Stone House, they're unbelievable. What they do and what they've achieved for the people they deal with. I wish there was more people like it. I wish you guys had billions of dollars and could fix the homeless problem. When they said their mission was to eradicate children that are homeless, I was like, that's what I've always wanted to do, but never found the right people to do it. And I think I have. And anyone that's here that's gone through anything or been a family member that's had troubles, that's why you're all here today. So thanks for coming. I appreciate it. My story is very long. You can buy the book if you want. I think you can only buy it online, or it's $2 shops now, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah, that's it. You get it.
$2 shops.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, they wouldn't do another run. It wasn't that successful, but like, seriously, what you guys do is incredible. I'm thrilled to be here to help you in any way, shape, or form. And I've loved chatting to the guys from Stepping Stone House. Like, I love to see the glint in their eye, the smiles on their faces. So thank you. Appreciate you guys coming along and listening to my long story. And power to everyone here. Like, let's help these guys eradicate homelessness. It's easy. It can be done. Tell everyone you know. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.